Hi everyone, thanks very much for joining me today. I'm with the lovely Lindsay Dunbar. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me along.
It's been a little while since we last saw each other, eh? We were in Edinburgh.
Yeah, we were in Edinburgh as part of the Edinburgh Fringe, doing the panel discussion, which was really exciting, and it was just a really lovely afternoon and a great opportunity to hear people in a room all sort of thinking similar thoughts. So that was really nice.
Now, the reason why you had did that was because you had just finished your research on rural arts hubs. Can you tell people who may be listening for the first time, tell us a little bit about that and why you came to start that question?
Yeah, so I was doing the Clore Fellowship. I was fortunate enough to be selected as the Creative Scotland Clore Fellow, and it's absolutely vital that organisations like Creative Scotland continue to invest in the Clore Fellowship because it's hugely beneficial to the cultural sector in Scotland, as well as the whole of the UK. And through that opportunity, we were invited to pitch ideas for research to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And the work that I was doing at that time, I was down in Bristol working with Bristol Old Vic, and I was looking at rural theatre in the southwest of England. And I was really interested in some of the relationships between Arts Council England and the support they'd given to English-based theatre companies and what was happening in Scotland, and the fact that it felt very urban-centric in Scotland with the support that was coming from Creative Scotland. So I wanted to kind of look at what the conditions were for successful theatre being produced in rural areas. So I did 3 case studies, and I went over to Holsteinbro in Denmark. I went to Dumfries in Galloway, and I also I did some case study calls down in Devon as well, and put together these 3 case studies. And what was really interesting was in Denmark, in Scotland and in England, what came out was this feeling that all these regions had actually been forgotten by the central sort of urban areas. So that's why the paper's called Forgotten Regions, because for various reasons it felt like the funding wasn't available, the audiences weren't there, the reputation wasn't of high quality, they've just all been forgotten. And they were all kind of in these little corners in the different parts of the countries. And it was really fascinating because over the course of the research, I kind of identified the conditions which were similar, whether they were in Denmark, Scotland, or England. They were the same conditions for this point of crisis, really, which enabled kind of cultural revolutions to start happening in these areas. So the conditions were basically things such as mass unemployment and underskilled opportunities as well. Young people leaving and going to the urban areas to get their qualifications and experience, and then also usually there being some sort of economic crisis as well. Now, obviously, historically, those were of their time, but I think it's really interesting that we're probably in the middle of a potential economic crisis at the moment, so it feels like a really good time to be talking about it. So when these 3 conditions kind of happen, there seems to be a movement towards looking at how culture can actually start to invest in areas and actually develop things and change things and grow things. And I think that's really exciting for rural areas, and I think theatre has a huge role to play in that.
So one of the things that's been interesting through the work that I've been doing in the last couple of podcasts is just looking at RFOs. And I suppose what's interesting from your research, you've looked at that as well. And I think it's really interesting that if you look over the 3 years, the amount that we're funding in regions completely differs. So for example, Edinburgh's got 41 portfolio holders, and then it roughly works out, I'd say, £50 per head of population over 3 years. Yet there's maybe areas in Scotland which there are with zero public funding spent. What is your opinion then on how can we address these balances within some of these RFOs?
I think, in my opinion, I think we need to look at how we are measuring the applications, and we actually have to consider different metrics, I think, when it comes to rural areas, because the outcomes for urban RFOs are completely different and non-comparable to what's happening in rural areas as well. I mean, you're never going to get the same number of bums on seats as you are, Inverness will never get the same as Glasgow or Edinburgh. And yet these are what things are getting measured by. How successful was the show? How many people turned up? That's great if you can say, yeah, it was a sellout show and we had a run for 3 months. Well, we don't have those kind of statistics in rural areas. So it should be about looking at the potential economic investment, the well-being, the social, the impact that they're having. One of the things I found particularly interesting about the work I was doing in Bristol was I could evidence that over the 10 years, as a result of some of the work that Bristol Vic had been doing, they were attracting young creative people out of London to relocate to the southwest and staying there. And that wasn't just about going to Bristol, which obviously is still quite an urban context, but it was about being scattered across the whole of the southwest and seeing Bristol as that kind of umbrella that held everything together. So there is a huge argument, I think, for changing the way we measure these things. You can't compare a giant cultural institution with an organization that's working across a region the size of Belgium. It just doesn't work. So I think we really, really need to address that. And I also think what would be groundbreaking would be, alongside audience development plans equality, diversity, inclusion plans, I would really like to see every single RFO have a rural strategy as well, because they always talk about engaging with other audiences, and usually that's tick box, we're going to tour a show somewhere. It's like, well, that's fine, but actually what else are you going to be doing? How are you going to ensure that you're not just parachuting in with a show and then leaving again? What are you actually going to be doing to support the development of culture in a rural area in a long-term and authentic way? And I think we absolutely need to be addressing that in the same way that I think rural organisations could also have an urban policy too. How are you going to ensure that you're reaching out to the cities and making sure they're aware of the work that's going on? Because otherwise we're all working in silos and just thinking we're all brilliant and that nothing else really matters. And actually, if they want to encourage the sector to be working more collaboratively, then we need to acknowledge that the other exists and that there's other opportunities then, and that could be a really great thing. I would just absolutely love to see a funding application form where somebody's got an actual rural policy about how they're going to engage meaningfully. I think that would be fantastic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you were speaking there, coming from Ayrshire myself, there's so many arts organisations that will go, we're coming to Ayr for the one day. We've done our bit, tick,
Yeah.
and cheerio. And I think what's really interesting is, for people that aren't in the arts, a lot of people don't understand that their taxpayer, so their taxes, are paying for the arts organisations, and then the national lottery funding through ticket sales are paying for the arts organisations, but then none of that money's coming to an area, especially if there's no RFO.
Yeah.
So the reason why I asked that question was because I think you're definitely right. There needs to be a rethink on how we do that, especially when we saw last year a lot of London organisations being asked, do you need to be in London?
Yeah.
Can you be somewhere else? Do you think that's maybe a similar motive of what's required here in Scotland?
I think that's a really good question. I suspect that Scotland is too small for something like that. And, I wonder how, Eden Court would react if the Traverse decided that actually they were going to set up Traverse North, But maybe it's not so much about that, but it's more about thinking about how do we share out the work so that, Eden Court could work with the Traverse, but to develop something new and different to support new theatre writing in the Highlands. So it wasn't Eden Court and it wasn't the Traverse, but it was them working together to create something else, almost like another organisation through a partnership which distributed the RFO funding. God, I feel like I'm coming up with this whole new sort of funding application idea myself. But basically, working properly collaboratively together to benefit other areas by setting up a new project or initiative together, which actually would potentially then become its own organisation in the end as well. That could be a really powerful way of spreading the resources and making sure that, yes, the cultural institutions were meeting their rural policies, but also it was helping the development back towards the urban areas as well, because they're strengthening links between the sort of the rural and the urban. And that could be really interesting. I suppose it'd be sort of a question of, yeah, I mean, you can really boil down into the statistics and kind of go, okay, so, you know, let's look at how much of your work is actually going out rurally. And actually, if we want to be really pedantic about it, 98% of Scotland is rural land. So actually, we should be having a much higher percentage of engagement in rural areas. And evidencing basically year-on-year growth of engaging in rural areas, and say actually your target is 98% engagement with rural areas, because that's what actually Scotland's landmass is. So yeah, it is a really interesting question, and I mean, you could even boil that down to, in a really simple form as well. You could say, you know, do all creative things have to happen in Inverness as well? And actually, as arts organisations in Inverness, do you need to be based in Inverness? Or if you're based in Inverness, are you really representing the Highlands? So, you know, and there are all of these kind of questions. And I think ultimately what it then boils down to is the sort of the government's theory of centralisation makes it things cheaper and more efficient. And that is, I think, the message that everybody's been taking on board, is actually it's easier to be centralised and say that you're delivering outwardly, when in reality is you're probably not, because you don't have enough funding to do it. But yeah, I think there could be really exciting ways of doing things, but yeah, the risk is the funding. You know, I think it'd be wonderful if, as a sector, we could campaign to the government and say, actually, can you give Creative Scotland funding for us to take risks, and actually have a risk fund, and say, actually, we want to do something really risky here. We want Eden Court and the Travers Theatre to be working together to create something new in a rural area. It's a risk, but it could also create jobs, and it could be great for the economy, and it could, you know, be the next Black Watch, which is going to go on and represent Scotland internationally. Who knows what could happen? It's a risk, but it's a risk which might be worth taking. And that would be really exciting, probably for Creative Scotland as well, who probably get brilliant applications, but have to sit there and go, this is too risky, we can't give funding for this. And that is because they have this massive responsibility when it comes to public funding. But God, wouldn't a risk fund, that would be so exciting.
I think you're right there, because as we move on with technology, we're going to be taking more and more risks, aren't we? And
Absolutely.
we're going to be doing things differently to try and get more people to take part in that. And I think definitely with a risk, especially here, you know, working in Ayrshire, where I'm working with young people, 97% are first-time participants. That's crazy, 97%. And to have that idea of a joint partnership, whether I'm taking a guess here, whether it's like the Trav, as you said, with the Airgatey, with somebody taking that work and creating that work at our local big theatre, and people saying these are Ayrshire stories, with the production values of the Trav, with the support of the Airgatey behind them, is exactly similar to what you're saying about Eden Court.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, I think the whole young people thing is a really interesting development, because currently I was looking this morning and there's so much funding being thrown into STEM and digital technology and all these things. And I agree with you 100% that there is so much opportunity to engage with young people in tech and digital and media and theatre and arts as well. Because, you know, and I know there's that case that the A should be in STEM to make it STEAM, but it just doesn't sound so good when it's STEAM somehow. But I think there's real potential for the creative sector to jump on board the STEM opportunities, to say, yeah, but, you know, if this is the future is going to be more going down the road of, you know, VR or, you know, streaming online and stuff. We need creative people to be involved in that process. And actually, you can create theatre using gaming, for instance. You know, there was a company in Londonderry who did a Minecraft piece of theatre, which was amazing, and it engaged people from all over the world, and people are still viewing it online. So actually, there's all these amazing ways of engaging young people in particular, and showing them these skills such as coding, but then also being able to apply that to, you know, theatre. And I think that's really exciting, because it's giving them transferable skills, life skills, confidence, but also potentially, you know, it makes a more interesting model when it comes to theatre as well, because there is that potential for people viewing it online, making donations, a way of generating income in a way that we've never had before. So there's something really exciting about this whole new generation of young people who are getting trained up in these amazing skills. And I think that the creative sector should be really working closely with them to say, we need you and your abilities and your talents and your ideas to work with us and future-proof the sector, basically.
Yeah, and I think you only get that from the arts, because if you think about it, a lot of the artwork that we do, a lot of it doesn't become successful. A lot of it is an individual learning process, and it's something that you don't teach in school, is reflection on what didn't go so well, how did you build on it, how can we learn from the next project, and that's where the arts come in. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, especially in rural areas at the moment anyway, that I see in my area, is how do we still build in community and keep that community core or values of bringing people together when venues and institutions have been shut due to lack of public funding. But then if young people are so focused on STEM, who have never had the opportunity to fail or been creative, then the two are never going to join up. And it makes our sector more elitist, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a really good observation. Yeah, I think it's really important that young people get exposure to absolutely everything, so they can figure out what they're good at and what they enjoy doing and where their potential lies. And I also think we should be encouraging them to think, beyond the obvious when it comes to job opportunities as well. And I think back to some of the things that I now know you can do for a living, and I think, God, why didn't somebody tell me I could do that? And I just think we need to make sure that young people realize that they can be great at maths and science and still work in the arts, actually, because we need people to have those skills as well. And yet it's really strange how all of the first thing to go is always like drama. And it's like, well, actually, how are you meant to learn about confidence or public speaking and things like that, unless your school happens to have a debating society, which not every school has.
No.
So yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I think there's a lot of potential. And I feel that the sector is ready for a bit of a change. And I also think it's brilliant that young people are getting this sort of access to STEM, especially in regions like the Highlands, because I see no reason why in 10 years' time, if we all have amazing infrastructure in place for broadband, that rural communities couldn't be a hotbed of digital arts and could be creating pieces of theatre which are then streamed over the internet, in the same way that Netflix does it. Why, if that is a vision for the future, then we can be working towards that. But we've got to have that imagination and the support from organisations like Creative Scotland to realise the benefit that actually public funding isn't just about putting on a piece of theatre on a big stage in Glasgow or Edinburgh. It's about the social impact, the economic impact, and the well-being that's having on a rural community as well. And that isn't just about a piece of theatre touring into the local village hall for one night. It's about everybody in that community being involved in the process and feeling ownership over it as well. And then having that tremendous sense of pride when it goes off and has another life somewhere else. And we all want to be supportive of each other. And I just think that's a kind of a message that we as a sector need to be articulating to the people who make the decisions.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, as obviously you're talking about forgotten regions in the arts, was what is the role of government funded or arts organisations within these regions? So for those who are listening, that's your like National Theatre Scotland, your Scottish Orchestra, you've got your Scottish Ballet,
Yeah.
to name such a few. What are the roles for these organisations?
With specifically to rural areas.
To rural, yeah.
Yeah. I suppose it's very much about being able to bring these incredible art forms, I feel, to communities that wouldn't be able to get that exposure in different ways. I mean, it's challenging because, somebody like Scottish Ballet, for instance, can't necessarily tour to small village halls. However, obviously schools can come to Eden Court, which is great. But I think for me, it's about being able to get up close and touching them and realizing that they're not these grand institutions. You know, to be able to speak to one of the ballet dancers and understand what it takes to actually be at that level, to realize that, you know, that person that you saw on the telly is now on the stage in front of you and you can go to a post-show discussion with them, to sort of break down those barriers that makes them seem inaccessible. Because I think it's through that that you can be more inspired and believe in the arts more as well, because, you know, ultimately some people have the argument that it's their funding, it's their money that's paying for that. So I think in order for them to really feel appreciated as the people paying for it, then there needs to be that accessibility. I remember seeing, it was one of the, I think it was the Scottish Symphony Orchestra were doing a tour, and they were in Ullapool, and one of their patrons, who's from the village that I'm from, Acklety, he posted up on social media a photograph with him and this young musician, because he'd been sponsoring his place and training him, and he said for him to meet him was this amazing opportunity. And he was really looking forward to seeing how his career progressed. Now, I think we should all have that kind of same sense of ownership when we go to see a piece of theatre. I remember seeing Billy Boyd in a Liz Lochhead play many, many, many years ago at Eden Court. And, you know, I see no reason why I shouldn't be able to accept a little bit of his glory for Lord of the Rings, because you kind of think, no, I invested in you as a professional. Like I love seeing you doing well because I saw that. So, yeah, I think that we should all get that opportunity to feel proud of being part of a creative process and supporting creative people.
I think you're right. I think it's interesting how many organisations don't come to even North Ayrshire, and we're closer than you to Glasgow. And I think now that we're having these conversations, we're always, as a public, having these conversations about doctors and how much funding the NHS should get. But we never talk about the arts. Like, if I'm paying money into National Ballet, I'd be like, National Ballet, why can't you like learn all your dances here and then tour somewhere else so I have access to it? And I think we have a right to that conversation if we're paying for it. So it'd be nice, I would at least say, it'd be nice if one of the things, maybe the problems that we face is not enough touring work. Maybe these organisations that were government funded should be the creation that they should be visiting each region of Scotland so that we all have that access to them, even if it's at just one venue, one big venue.
Which is why they need a rural policy.